Australia passes a right to disconnect law. Meanwhile, one U.S. employer is accused of literally working their employees to death. I'm Karen Michael, and you're listening to The Job Judge. Welcome to The Job Judge, the podcast for anyone who works. I'm Karen Michael, your host of The Job Judge, where together we navigate through all those legal landmines and workplace dysfunction that's probably happening in your organization. If you're a human resources professional, a business owner, a manager, you're not going to want to miss an episode of The Job Judge. Be sure to subscribe. Hit the subscribe button right here on your YouTube channel. Or if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, be sure to follow along. Hit the follow button so you don't miss an episode. Now, a couple ground rules. Number one, we do talk about sensitive subjects here on The Job Judge, so it really is adult content. Also, I will be talking about legal topics, and I am a lawyer, but I cannot give legal advice on the podcast. So let's start with what's happening in Australia. In August 2024, Australia's right to disconnect after hours law went into effect. And this is what it entails. The Australia law, according to NPR, is the latest country to protect workers who ignore work calls and messages after hours under certain circumstances. According to the law doesn't strictly prohibit employers from calling employees after hours, but it does give employees protection who refuse to monitor, read, or respond to contact or attempted contact outside their normal working hours unless their refusal is unreasonable. That includes outreach from their employer as well as other people if the contact or attempted contact is work related. And the goal of the law is to bring back some work-life balance because honestly, we are working ourselves to death. And that brings me to the article that was in the Wall Street Journal. And I'm not trying to diss on banks, but this article is very alarming. And I think it's a little bit of a wake-up call to ask, is this the kind of life that we're willing to lead in the name of making a lot of money? If the answer is yes, and it's yes, but understand the consequences of this. The article talks about Bank of America, and the article is out of the Wall Street Journal on August 11th, 2024. And the article was in response to a death that occurred at Bank of America in May of 2024. Allegedly, an employee of Bank of America, Leo Lucanis, age 35, who was a former Green Beret, was found dead of a blood clot formed from a coronary artery after he worked over 100 hours for over a month to close a big $2 billion deal. The deal closed at the end of April. They had a big celebration for the closing, and then he's found dead, leaves a family behind. And the question is, were they working him to death? That's the debate. And that's what this article talks about. And I think it's important because one of the things that the Wall Street Journal did is they interviewed employees to find out what is really going on in this work environment. And I grew up in big law. My first job was at a big law firm. We worked a lot of hours. We worked really hard. And I valued that time because I felt like I was being mentored. I was learning how to be a lawyer. But I'm 26, 27, 28 years old, and that's time that I'll never get back in my life. And so we have to ask, what is it worth to work but also make a lot of money? Because that's what these people at Bank of America are doing. They're making upwards of $200,000 a year as a first-year associate. But this is what the article said on August 11th. And then there was a follow-up article because Bank of America did kind of feel the need to respond. And so there was a follow-up article to that, and I'll tell you about in a minute. But this is how the article starts. It talks about a person who was thrilled to get a job at Bank of America while a student at Smith College. And it talks about how she quit in 2022 years after 3 years at the Chicago office, where senior bankers kept her and her teammates at their desks until 5 a.m. and instructed them to lie about their hours. Once, she said she worked until 4 a.m. in the office and was on her way home in a taxi only for her boss to request more changes to a proposal to a client and to leave a printed copy for senior staff to review later in the morning. She asked the cab driver to turn around. She went back to the office after she had been working there into the wee hours of the morning. Another person talked about how he worked as a junior investment banker for the bank in Tokyo. He said he meticulously logged his overtime hours, but when human resources told his boss that this employee was working too much, a manager told him to report only as many as were allowed by the bank's policies. He said he continued to work at least one all-nighter every week, saying it wasn't unusual for junior bankers to catch a few hours of sleep in a bathroom stall or a conference room. He left after his doctor flagged his cholesterol and other indicators had spiked to unhealthy levels. Another person working in New York allegedly collapsed last year after working long hours, prompting his colleagues to call an ambulance to the office. Another New Yorker cited in this article, currently a vice president, checked into a hospital in 2024 after he felt run down and sick from working around the clock. Yet he chose to continue fulfilling tasks and took client calls from the hospital bed. What are we doing? Is this really the culture that we want in our work environments? Is Australia right to say, look, when you're off the clock, you need to live your life? Now, Bank of America did respond. And I thought it was very interesting because in one of the articles, it talked about how some employees were working upwards of 120 hours a week. Now, I'm no math whiz, but I do have a calculator on my phone and determined that we have 168 hours in a 7-day week. So 24 times 7 is 168 hours. How many did this person work? 120 hours. 120 of your 168 precious hours in a 7-day period working. And so Bank of America did kind of respond because obviously this is devastating reporting, and kudos to the Wall Street Journal for going out and interviewing people and finding out what was really happening. Because here's a man who was a Green Beret, and yet he only died after he was working himself at Bank of America. Now, did Bank of America cause his death? I'm not saying that. I don't know that there's evidence of that, but there's an accusation that working those kind of hours, sitting at your desk for that kind of time, could lead to health consequences that could lead to serious health consequences, potentially a blood clot that could be caused if you're sitting that long. Now, Bank of America, in the follow-up article on August 13th, says Bank of America urges bankers to sound alarm on overwork after Wall Street Journal investigation. And it talked about how they had reported this earlier, and then the bank responded. Bank of America, the article says, is urging young bankers to accurately report the hours they work after an investigation by Wall Street Journal found bankers are often pressured to ignore rules meant to prevent dangerous overwork. Several junior investment bankers were told by their managers Monday, and only after this article went out, to alert superiors or the Human Resources Department if they are being pressured to misreport hours. They were also told that the mandate to do so comes from highest levels of the company. Yeah, now that you've kind of been caught, it's going down. Managers, meanwhile, discussed the topic in a regularly scheduled meeting Monday, including global corporate and investment banking head and representatives. The discussions came after the publication. The story was based on conversations of more than 36 current and former bankers, detailing how junior bankers are routinely instructed to lie about their hours. Now, this is the part that I think is kind of interesting. A spokeswoman for Bank of America said in a statement that its practices are clear and all employees and managers are expected to follow them. When we become aware that they aren't being followed, disciplinary action has been taken. Here's the part that I think is so interesting. She says junior bankers, typically analysts and associates, aren't supposed to work more than 100 hours a week and should have Saturdays off unless Human Resources grants exceptions. 100 hours a week. So their response to this article where employees were overworked is just acknowledging that it's normal to work 100 hours, but if you work more than that, then that's a bad thing. That's the mindset, is 100 hours is the norm. 100 of your 168 hours working. And it talks about how these people make a lot of money and they're making upwards of $200,000. And so they're afraid to speak up because they don't want to lose their big gig. Here's my advice to employers, managers, etc. What is your business model? Is this the business model that people literally work these kind of hours to earn their time? Yes, occasionally. If I was getting ready for a big trial or I had some emergency happen, occasionally you put in the long hours. Occasionally you put in 7 days of work. Occasionally that's going to happen. But that should not be the norm. We need to normalize work-life balance. And what work-life balance looks like is that we work to live. We don't live to work. We all need to work to earn money to pay our bills, to support our family. We all need to do that. I mean, work is an essential part of our lives. The question is whether work is the only part of our lives. And really, we see remote workers in some cases. In some cases, they're, not working at all. But in some cases, you're not working from home, you're living at work. And so it's easy to just pop into that work office, or if you're working from the kitchen table, you're always working. We need to establish boundaries in our work environment. Establish what are those boundaries. And if the boss is constantly calling you after hours, expecting that you're going to be ready on the fly, expecting that at 8 o'clock on a Friday night, when you're out with friends, you're going to drop everything and go back to the office and do work, that's not a healthy work environment. And as leaders and organizations, we should normalize making our work life have a balance. And we can do that. Leaders are in a position to do that. Does that mean we hire more people? Does that mean we pay a little less each person so we have more people to build that work-life balance in? What does it mean to make sure we have the work-life balance? And that also can go for overtime. Well, yes, some employees who are non-exempt, who do get overtime compensation, they do enjoy getting the overtime. They want that extra money. But when we make overtime mandatory and you have employees working for a month at 80, 100 hours, they're making a lot of money. But what I hear from employees is on top of that, tons of taxes are being taken out and they hardly even see it. So make sure that we are asking employees whether they can work a certain number of hours and cap the number of hours, because it's just not healthy. And finally, take your vacation. All of it, 100% of it. All the time I hear employees say, well, I just can't take all my vacation. Now, I'm not opposed to carrying over a week if that's something that you can do. And I am conflicted about PTO, paid time off, because PTO typically encompasses sick time and vacation. And I worry that it's hard to plan because you need to set aside a few days just in case somebody gets sick before maybe a short-term disability kicks in. I think I prefer having a bank of sick leave and a bank of vacation time. Although, employers will say there's abuse and people take sick when they're not really sick. And I understand there's no perfect system, but take all of it. Now, I want to speak to unlimited PTO for a second. I'm not a fan. It sounds great. It sounds wonderful to have unlimited PTO, but in reality, people don't know what that means. And so they take less than they might at another organization that has a set amount. I like clarity in rules. I like to know exactly what the expectations are. I don't want there to be any confusion, any resentment, any concern. So tell your employees how much time they have to take off and then make sure they take all of it. And don't deny an employee the opportunity to go on a vacation unless it's truly what we call a blackout period, where maybe there's a big upgrade happening or there's a merger or something. I mean, there's going to be times potentially when there's going to be periods of time where people can't take vacation, with extreme exceptions. But in general, let your employees take their time off and truly encourage them to take all of their time. It's not a win to have an employee that never takes time off. That's not a win. That's an employee that's getting burned out. And set boundaries. Make sure you have a boundary between working time and off time. And when those employees are off, barring some extreme exception, they need to be off. And now it's time for our segment, Ask the Job Judge, where I answer a question that somebody has maybe emailed me at Karen@thejobjudge.net, or I saw it on Reddit, or somebody messaged me on TikTok or Instagram. Be sure to follow me there, by the way, at The Job Judge on TikTok and Instagram. I post a lot of other content on there. But today's episode of Ask the Job Judge, I want to talk about a viral video that's going around of a woman who wore shorts to a job interview and posted about it as though she was irritated that she was basically told her dress was inappropriate. Here's the video.
So I just got dress coded during an interview. And then they decided to reschedule the interview with me for tomorrow. But before they rescheduled, the lady was like, would you like to come back? Like go change and then come back? And I was like, no. These are the shorts. Let me turn to the side for y'all. These are the shorts.
What I want to say to this woman is read the room. Read the room. Wearing shorts to a job interview is not appropriate unless possibly you're applying to be a lifeguard or possibly applying to do like a summer camp. Maybe that would be an appropriate place to wear shorts to a job interview. But if you're going into a professional office, I would say, frankly, wearing shorts to work ever in a professional working environment is not really something that is professional or appropriate. Now, I know in this day and age, people get upset about dress codes and people deserve to be individuals and all those things. And I understand that. But there's a time and place. And the time and place to go to a job interview is to dress appropriately and professionally. And the common expectation of professional dress is pants that are nicely fitted, not too tight, not too loose, not frayed, or a skirt or something that is not too above the knee, not revealing. If you can see up it, down it, or through it, don't wear it. Dress appropriately for your job interview. And if you don't dress appropriately for your job interview, don't complain that you didn't get the job. Because one reason you didn't get the job is because you have terrible judgment. And nobody wants to work with somebody who has terrible judgment. Now, we drop an episode of The Job Judge every single week. You are not going to want to miss an episode. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, follow along. If you work, if you're an HR professional, if you're a manager, you are not going to want to miss an episode. I'm Karen Michael, and you've been listening to The Job Judge.